are calling on both sides to stop using rockets in populated areas. Nazanin Mashiri reports on Donetsk on the continuing fighting between Ukraine's army and pro-Russia separatist rebels.
In Donetsk, the shelling continues. The smoke is rising close to apartment blocks built in the Soviet era. But many of them are empty. Emergency workers here estimate more than half of the city's population has gone. That's almost 600,000 people. And this is why they're leaving. A shell landed next to this school. It was empty because of the holidays. Like many here, its caretaker says she can't understand why Ukraine is at war.
We're really in shock. Ukrainians and Russians lived and worked together peacefully. We didn't even think about our nationalities. Now we're just thinking about how to survive.
More civilians are dying in this conflict than soldiers. Hundreds of people have been killed and thousands injured. Now Human Rights Watch is accusing Ukrainian forces of firing Grad rockets on people's homes. The elderly couple that live here were watching television when the rocket hit their apartment. I can show you how lucky they were to survive. You can just see the gaping hole in their rooftop. Both sides are denying using Grad rockets on populated areas. They are renowned for being inaccurate. That's because the rockets are unguided and are often fired from multi-barrel launchers covering a wide area. Ukraine insists it's not using Grad missile systems around Donetsk.
The Grads that our military possesses haven't arrived there yet, and they're not within range of the areas mentioned in the report. As of now, our units with light artillery are blocking the exits from Donetsk, but it's the terrorists' Grads that have been shelling Donetsk to try to show the Ukrainian forces in a bad light.
Earlier in July, Al Jazeera filmed Ukrainian Grad rocket launchers on the road to Donetsk. Human Rights Watch says Kiev must now take responsibility.
Instead of denying this, I think it would be wise for the Ukrainian government to commit to immediately stop using these kinds of rockets in populated areas. They are indiscriminate. The moment you use them in these areas, they are going to kill and injure civilians.
Ukrainian forces are pushing further into Donetsk, and separatist pro-Russian fighters are preparing to defend this city, whatever the costs. Nazanin Mashiri, Al Jazeera, Donetsk, eastern Ukraine.
Ukraine's foreign minister is blaming Russia for civilian deaths in Donetsk.
It's our key priority is not to use any weapons in the blocks area, in the living area. But it's exactly the tactics the terrorists have been following. Putting tanks which came across the border with Russia and putting rocket-propelled grenades, especially in Donetsk, but also in other cities in Donetsk and Lugansk. And it's exactly the practice which has to be stopped.
The Netherlands is sending 40 military police to Ukraine to help search for missing victims from the Malaysia Airlines crash. Amid rising frustration over the investigation, Dutch government leaders are also considering sending armed teams to protect investigators collecting evidence from the site. From The Hague, here's David Chater.
The contingent of special police forces being flown into Ukraine on Thursday night will not be carrying any of the weapons they use while on duty here in the Netherlands. Known as Royal Marshals, their job is to guard the borders, highways and national assets of their country. But they are no strangers to war zones. They were deployed in Afghanistan to train police recruits. The first phase of their mission this time will be a purely humanitarian role to aid in the task of finding the victims and body parts that still remain where they fell 1 week ago when Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 was shot down. Lawmakers at the House of Representatives were debating with the Dutch Prime Minister whether to launch a second mission, which would send in armed teams to protect investigators, collecting evidence from the wreckage, which would show once and for all who was to blame for bringing down the plane.
At this moment, both parties are not fighting. We're not sure if that means that there is a ceasefire, and that has been the case since Monday. The Ukrainian army is promising a ceasefire in a 40-kilometer area around the crash site, while 10 kilometers is agreed at this moment. The The Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe is liaising with both parties.
There are reports that all leave has been cancelled for the Dutch Airborne Division because of the chances of an operation being launched. The Australians, too, are keen to send some forces to the area.
Public opinion in the Netherlands might be very much behind such a move, but many senior foreign policy analysts are sounding a note of caution.
I think it's a very risky operation indeed, but at the same time, I think there are some assurances which have been secured by the Dutch government from the OSCE on the ground there, and maybe even from some separatist leaders.
As more bodies arrive each day at Eindhoven's military base, the latest flights carrying more than 100 victims, grief is being replaced by anger here. Demands for justice and a demand that no one should be left behind on the battlefields of Ukraine. David Chater, Al Jazeera, The Hague.
Air accident and criminal investigators have reached the remote site of an airliner crash in